Hello everyone, and welcome back. Last time on What If Starkiller Survived, Galen faced off against the Emperor and lived. The rebel leaders argued whether or not they should accept a man who betrayed them into their ranks, but ultimately decided to let him fight for their cause. General Kota took Galen as his formal apprentice, and after capturing a Nebulon B frigate renamed the Salvation, started preparations for the boys' next lesson. A lesson which would take them to the Imperial-occupied world of Ilum. A lesson which would force Galen to face memories he had buried, and build a new weapon for the battles to come. Rolling right into this, Ilum is a world with an oddly small Imperial garrison. This is odd due to how important the world is to the Jedi, both spiritually and tangibly. As most know, Ilum is the source of almost all the lightsaber crystals for the Jedi come the centuries leading up to and the years of the Clone Wars. The world has now become more or less a place of exile for officers and Imperial personnel who stepped on the wrong toes. The flagship in orbit is the Hoplite, really strange name considering where that word comes from on Earth, but details. Which is a Gladiator-class Star Destroyer commanded by Captain Malthurgan. I screwed that up, it doesn't matter. Some imp bastard. Despite having the name Star Destroyer, the Gladiator is a small vessel which is often described as a frigate or light cruiser. It packs a punch and has a nice hangar capacity, sure, but it certainly isn't a Star Destroyer as we all tend to think of them. The source of my information, which I'm getting all of this from, is the Nexus of Power RPG book, which is a supplement to the Force and Destiny tabletop game. Not to be confused with Forces of Destiny or whatever that mad experiment was. I'm using this information because it's described as Legends and covers the time right before the rebellion actually kicks off. Outside of the Gladiator, there is a small escort fleet of frigates and gunboats which don't amount to much. Due to the nature of Ilum's posting, most vessels are falling apart and are filled with incompetent officers who are now at dead ends in their careers. To go along with this, the garrison on the ground is only about 150 strong, with a few light vehicles and ATSTs acting as support. The garrisons both in space and on the ground also hate each other, with a bunch of infighting constantly occurring. Imperial forces on Ilum are extremely weak, undisciplined, and have low morale. It is the perfect place for Kota and his militia to strike, and strike they do. With the Salvation, a handful of DP-20s, CR-90s, and other escort vessels, and a collection of starfighters, Kota assaults the Imperial forces on Ilum. The battle is fierce, however the Jedi General's experience and better trained troops are able to defeat the surprised Imperials in a pitched battle before they can get word off. As the battle in space continues, Galen leads the ground assault and with aid from the militia is able to defeat the forces garrisoned at the temple. The battle is not without rebel casualties, but it is brief. The first large-scale operation conducted by Kota and Galen is a complete success. Despite the battle being over, Galen still had something he had to do. Venture into the temple and find a crystal so he could construct his own lightsaber. As he begins to do so, the rebel forces salvage what they can from the Imperials and attempt to patch up the enemy ships that are still functional for future use. Now, if getting a crystal on Ilum wasn't something with multiple interpretations, be it the Clone Wars cartoon, the original Clone Wars cartoon, or the multitude of books and comics which touch on the subject, then I'd be going a bit more in depth with what happens here. As an example, if I went by the original interpretation of Ilum, the rebels could harvest crystals without going on a spiritual journey. If I went by the Clone Wars cartoon, the second one, then the rebels would be kinda out of luck. Ultimately, neither choice has any bearing on events going forward, but I'd figured it was worth a mention. As Galen descends into the temple alone, he can't help but feel out of place. Despite trying his best to be a better man and distance himself from the dark side, he is still very much entwined with that destructive force. The hatred and rage in his heart is something that still hasn't subsided, and as he ventures even further into the temple looking for a crystal, these feelings only get stronger. Galen's negative emotions are almost entirely directed at Vader, a man who betrayed him on more than one occasion. There was a lurking question the young man had, however. Why were his feelings as strong as they were? Vader was just his master, so why did he hate him as much as he did? With those thoughts clouding his mind, Galen began to feel a sensation which drew his attention to his lightsaber. After igniting his weapon, Galen began to stare into its blue blade. At first, using Kota's lightsaber was strange. It never felt right in the hand. However, after finding a blue crystal in a hut on Kashyyyk, it felt more natural to use. Letting himself follow that train of thought, Galen began to think back on the Jedi spirit he fought at the temple on Coruscant, and how it appeared to him on Kashyyyk in the very hut he found the crystal. He knew the spirit was his father, a Jedi named Galen Marek, but beyond that there was nothing. No memories or feelings associated with the man, just a blank void. These two different thoughts began to clash in the young Jedi's mind. For Vader, a man he had known for most of his life, he felt almost uncontrollable hatred and rage. For Kento, a father he never knew, he felt nothing. While dwelling on the question of why he was thinking about them both, Galen suddenly and violently lost consciousness. As he came to, the young Jedi found himself surrounded by the lush forests of Kashyyyk and not the frozen landscape of Ilum. He watched as Kento and Vader fought, and he watched as his father died before the eyes of a younger version of himself before witnessing the hell that was Vader's training. Galen saw his entire life flash before his eyes and realized many things as the frozen Ilum landscape surrounded him once again. The blue crystal which dwelt within Galen's saber was that of his father's, and it was the one he was meant to find. The beginning part of his vision were memories he had long since repressed, and were the source of the young Jedi's rage toward Vader. The harshest realization Galen had to come to terms with was the fact, no matter how twisted, that he used to and possibly still did view Vader as a father figure. The Sith Lord was the one who took the young Jedi's father away from him, and yet that very Sith Lord was the one that came to mind as the word passed through him. The feelings that this brought out were hard to face or even understand. As Galen left the temple, his mind was flooded with both confusion and doubt. Aboard the Salvation, Galen removed his father's crystal from Kota's saber and planted it into his new one. Trying to latch on to some sort of thread of the past, the external section of Galen's hilt was fashioned from the strongest wood which grew on Kashyyyk. The interior, however, was built from more durable metal alloys, which would ensure the weapon could keep up with the young Jedi's fighting style. Galen's saber wasn't a glamorous weapon, nor was it one which stood out. However, it was his own. With a new weapon in hand, Galen returned Kota's old saber without exchanging any words about what happened on Ilum. Both master and apprentice understood that whatever happened was only meant for the eyes of the one who perceived it. A few months would pass and the rebel offensive known as Operation Domino would continue to fail. This would result in conflict between General Kota and Mon Mothma, who had very different viewpoints on how battles should be fought. Kota believed in rapid, quick strikes, which would maximize damage to the enemy without sustaining heavy losses. Mothma, on the other hand, still believed large, traditional battles were the way to go. The Alliance was at a deadlock, and it didn't have the firepower to take out any large-scale targets like Mothma wanted, and Kota's strategy of hit and run cost too many lives which could have been used to strike at critical targets. It was during this deadlock that Galen received a strange message. A message from a group of Kaminoan cloners. The Battle of Ilum, though brief, was used by the Alliance propagandists as an example of a major victory against the Empire. Because of this, many across the galaxy had become aware of not only the victory, but of the Jedi who crushed the Imperial forces. They became aware of Galen. This was of particular interest to the Kaminoan cloners, for they were issued a strange project by Darth Vader himself. They were to use the genetic information taken from a Force sensitive and use it to create an army of clones. While Galen was being revived after Vader's first betrayal, the Sith Lord made sure to extract as much genetic information as he could from his apprentice in a bid to create either another apprentice or an army which could be used to overthrow Palpatine. Due to Galen's limited genetic information, the Kaminoans had to resort to splicing together both the DNA of the young Jedi and what remained of Jango Fett's DNA. What this resulted in was something the cloners didn't expect. Be it the splicing, or the fact the DNA was from a Force sensitive, the clones which came from this experiment grew to maturity, but stayed that way without getting old in a matter of months. The clones themselves were also not identical, for each one had their own individual features which stemmed from their genetic fathers. In their attempt to grow Force sensitives, the Kaminoans accidentally created an army of skilled soldiers. An army which they believed could could free their world from Imperial occupation. Several years ago, there was a failed clone uprising on Kamino. Due to said uprising, the Empire exerted even more authority upon the Kaminoans, making the world a despotic hellscape. The cloners working on Vader's project, however, both had less and more freedom to do what they wanted. Vader kept a tight grip upon what happened on the world. However, due to the project technically not existing, the watchful gaze of the Empire was dimmer on them than on any other parts of the planet. After hearing about the victory on Ilum and seeing a Jedi who looked remarkably similar to their clones, the Kaminoans took a risk and contacted the Alliance. They contacted Galen. Their proposal was simple. They would supply information on Kamino and an army of clones who have been grown in secret in exchange for the liberation of their world, or at the very least, their own ensured safety. Galen took this proposal to Kota, and after much debate against a man who detested clones, the general relented. The rebellion needed a victory, and they needed capable soldiers. Without informing Mon Mothma, Kota, Galen, and Juno agreed to the Kaminoans' plans and readied their forces for combat. They would free Kamino and usher in the rise of the Last Legion. With that said, guys, that's all I have for this video. This is probably going to be on hiatus for a little bit as I do other things and work on other stuff. I know I'm saying Galen's name wrong, but saying Galen is so much easier for me to do when recording for some reason. So if you're gonna comment saying that constantly, I'm fully aware. But with that said, guys, I've been Bufar101. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see all of you guys next time. Goodbye.